Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about visitor visas. So we've chosen to do this topic, or I've chosen to do this topic this week because we get a lot of inquiries about visitor visas and there's a lot of misinformation about it out there. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to not only go over the process, but I wanted to go over the differences in the visitor visas. But I also want to talk about some different things that allow you to maximize your success in being able to successfully navigate the visitor visa process. Okay. So, what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about the types of visas and as they relate to the Canadian immigration system. I'm going to go over a business visitor visa versus a tourist visa, applying for a visa and supporting documents, factors that visa officers will consider, why the checklist is always not your best guide, is not always your best guide, planning your visit and its importance, and putting it all together to maximize your success. All right. So, a few things before we get started. There's a lot of information here, and I always like to throw in a little bit extra in terms of things that sometimes get confused or need to be related to the visitor visa topic. However, we got a lot to go over, and I'm going to do that as best as I can here with the time that we have. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in and I will certainly answer them for you. But if you could keep them general in nature, that would be awesome. So let's get started. All right. So first things first. All right. Technically it's a visitor visa. That's what everybody refers to it as. But what we really refer to it as as a professional designation is a TRV, a temporary resident visa. Okay, TRV. So the way that the Canadian immigration system works is that you have two different pathways that you can go, well, on a very general level, but you have a temporary pathway or a permanent pathway. So when you show up at the airport and you want to come in through the CBSA officer or the customs officer, but we call them Canadian Border Services Agency here in Canada, what's going to happen is they're going to ask you a number of questions. They're going to ask you what your nationality is, and then they're going to ask you what your residency is. And then they'll, delve into there and go through the customs questions and things like that. The purpose of those questions is to kind of figure which pathway you're going down. Are you going down the permanent pathway or are you going down the temporary pathway? So a TRV is basically a temporary resident visa, which is a visitor visa. But when you come in here as a temporary resident, you're only coming in for a temporary purpose. That could be a visitor, a student, a temporary foreign worker, somewhere along those lines. Okay. And a lot of times there's the stamp in your passport, which we're going to talk about, but that's actually the TRV. And the biggest thing that you need to understand about a TRV is it doesn't actually guarantee you access. Just because you have that, you still have to go through the final check at the border. The only thing that sticker happens, like the only thing that it allows you to do is it allows you to show up, present yourself at Canadian immigration and say, hi, I want to come to Canada today. The final determination will be made by the border officer. Now, the chances of you actually having some issues, 99.9% of the time are slim to nil. However, you must understand that just because you have that sticker, it's more of a travel permit to get you on the plane and be able to go and show up and then seek admission into Canada. All right. So single entry versus multiple entry. Now, many years ago, I don't even know anymore. I think it was like 4 years ago. It was February around 20th. We used to just, give out singles and multiples if they were asked for, and you had the ability to be able to get either or. Now they really just give out multiple entries, unless there's something that they only want to restrict you to, or they want to keep you, unless there's a reason for the single entry. But 9 out of 10 times now, they'll give you a multiple entry visa. And the reason that they do that is because they want to make sure that they cut down on the paperwork and the processing and all of the different things that they need to do. Okay. So that's the first thing. So there is a distinction in the TRV between a single entry and a multiple entry. And what you need to know is that it's generally standard to get a multiple entry tourist visa right now, or a TRV, as opposed to a single entry. but sometimes they'll issue a single entry with, under the condition of like, let's give this person a shot, or maybe it's a certain purpose that you're asking for and they want to make sure that it's restricted to that, whatever it might be. A transit visa is generally for somebody, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it's generally for somebody who's transiting through Canada. A super visas are basically TRVs, which allow you to come and stay for upwards of 2 years. However, we don't generally recommend super visas for the reason that it's no different than a TRV. You're going to have to do a lot more. There's going to be a lot more scrutiny. You're good in terms of medical exams and financial documents and all of these different things. You're going to have to buy really expensive insurance as part of the visa, and you're allowed to stay upwards of 2 years. However, the determination if you're allowed to stay for 2 years or longer is done by the border officer when they actually stamp you in. So they could stamp you in for 6 months, or they could stamp you in for 2 months, or they might not stamp you in at all. But the point is that you have to go through all of this extra work. You have to pay extra money for really expensive insurance that you're directed to buy. It just doesn't make sense. So, and there's no difference really than having a regular visa, a regular TRV. That's a multiple entry. You can always extend that while you're in Canada by filing an application to extend through a visitor record. You can also ask for that at the airport. However, I would be careful with that. But really, at the end of the day, there's no real difference with the super visa. One of the things that I like to talk about, because I don't think I'll be doing a presentation on the super visa anytime soon, because again, I think that when the super visas actually came into play, they were being done at a time that, in my humble opinion, it was a political decision. Back when Jason Kennedy was Minister of Immigration, back in, I think, 2013 it was very smart. It was just before the election. There was a long backlog in parent sponsorships. Generally the people that are backlogged are, voters. And maybe they wanted to do something to bring in mom and dad. And so, super visa, it's super. It's not really super. And quite frankly, when it was initially rolled out, a lot of people were shocked because they went through all this stuff and they were getting like 6-month stamps in their passport, because that's determined by the border officer when they come in. Anyways, we'll just leave it at that. So ETAs, electronic travel authorizations. So an electronic travel authorization is if you are from a country where you're TRV exempt. Okay, so what does that mean? If you're TRV exempt, you don't have to apply and go through this rigmarole process to get the sticker in your passport before you come. All right. So some countries, like, let's use the Philippines, for instance, right? They are not TRV exempt. You have to apply for a visitor visa prior to coming. But if we take somebody from, say, the UK or, most European countries, they can just apply for an ETA, electronic travel authorization, which is, really quickly done online and filled out. And then, they get this email back and then they can travel. Okay. So the difference is if you need a TRV, then you need to apply and go through this process and then get approved and get a sticker. If you are TRV exempt, you need to do an ETA. Okay. A temporary resident permit, a TRP. Now, this has nothing to do with a temporary resident visa, but I like to put it in there because sometimes there is some confusion to what a TRP is, and they generally get mistaken. Okay. So a TRP is not to be confused with a TRV. A TRP is when you have some form of inadmissibility. It is a discretionary tool that is used by, say, a CBSA officer or an IRCC officer, where they can actually allow you, by issuing you a TRP, to overcome some sort of inadmissibility. So I'll give you an example. In Canada, if you want to come to Canada, you can't have any DUIs. A DUI, driving under the influence, drunk driving. So if you've been charged and convicted of that, then what's going to happen is that's considered serious criminality. Now, say you've got somebody, they didn't know that, they're coming in for a business meeting, and the officer's like, yeah, I want to let this guy in. He can't say, you seem like a really good guy, I'm just going to let you in. It doesn't work that way. okay? Because he can't just discretionarily figure out what the law is and his interpretation of it. He has to follow the law, or he or she, sorry. So what's going to happen is there he or she can issue a TRP, which is basically a document that allows that person to admit, that CBSA officer to admit that person into Canada. Okay, it allows them to be discretionary and get over the inadmissibility and allows them to enter and carry on. All right. So I put that in there. It doesn't have anything to do with a temporary resident visa, but a lot of times people confuse these two items because they're very different, but they sound very much the same. Now, we've already went over the Canadian immigration system here, but I do want to emphasize, you got to ask yourself, are you coming in for a permanent purpose or a temporary purpose? And if you are conflicting on that and saying, yeah, I'm coming in as a visitor, but I want to apply for permanent residency as an in-Canada spousal, you might have some issues with that, for instance. Okay. There is provisions under Section 22 of the Act for dual intent, which means you can have two intentions, but you need to be careful on how you spell that out. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Okay. Business visitor versus a tourist visa. Now, we don't really call them tourist visas, but there's a business TRV. A business TRV is a little bit different in terms of, say, how can I put it? They're the same, but they have different purposes. Okay. So if you're coming here as a business visitor, you're coming to Canada and you're doing some sort of international business but the biggest difference is that you're not entering the Canadian labor market. All right. Some examples are, you have a meeting, you're looking to make an investment. There might be a way that you're growing your business, something along those lines. Okay. And generally duration, they generally vary, but it has to make sense for the application. So if you're only coming in for, I've got a few meetings, but I'm going to stay 6 months, you might have some questions there. So you can technically stay up for 6 months, but you need to have it all kind of laid out why you're doing that and what you're applying for. All right. So normally, though, there is a cap on that. You have to stay for less than 6 months. Here's some of the provisions. So you have to stay for less than 6 months. You definitely can't enter the Canadian labor market because if you're going to do that, you require a work permit. Your main place of business is your country where you're located or another country where you're working. And that's also your main source of income and profit. Okay. You're going to need to go through the rigmarole with the documents for the process. You're going to need to have a passport. You're going to need to show that you have enough money. You're going to need to show that you're going to leave Canada at the end of it. Okay. Some of the other things that might be covered under a business visitor visa is coming in, well, any type of business where you're, maybe working with another Canadian company, or you're going to a meeting or conference, or you're being trained by a Canadian parent company, or giving after sales service or something along those lines. But there's a number of different things that you need to take into account with that. All right. The main thing is that it has to be short term. You can't enter the Canadian job market. You don't require a work permit. That's only if you are entering the Canadian job market. And you can bring family members, but they're going to need an ETA or their own visas. They're totally on their own. But again, it has to fit into the overall story of what you're doing. So, example, I want to bring my family, like I'll routinely go somewhere. I'll bring, a family member with me. And then, if it's somewhere interesting, we might go and do some touristy type stuff to take advantage of the fact that we're in a different location. So that all makes sense, but it has to be all spelled out. Now, I put in there the Canadian US Mexico Trade Agreement, or USMCA is what it's called, the new NAFTA. Again, business visitor, I don't want to confuse it with what a business visitor is, because that's actually, it's different in terms of that, especially with the provisions now with Mexican nationals being TRV exempt, and same with the US nationals. So I'm just wanted to draw that as, and again, this is a whole different topic, but I just wanted to draw that as a distinction because sometimes those can get cloudy. All right, let's move on. Okay, here's all the fun stuff. All right, I'm gonna sit up in my chair. So, applying for your visa and supporting documentation. So, you're going to have to go through, there's government forms that you're going to have to fill out. You're going to have to follow the instructions of the local visa office. So, wherever you're applying, you're going to need to follow those instructions. Now, place of application, if you're in a country that's other than your nationality, you can apply in that country if you so choose to, or you can apply in the country of nationality. Okay. As long as you're legally admitted into the country and a few different things. Okay. So covered under regulation R11 if you want to check it out. And it talks about the place of application. Okay. Online versus paper applications. Now, paper applications are going away. I believe, very few things that you can do paper-based wise now. And I think with the recent times in terms of what's going on with COVID and different things like that, the Canadian government has already expressed that they're going to get away from paper. So I would strongly suggest that you, if given the choice in any application, if you can do an online versus a paper, unless there's some sort of strategic decision to do a paper application, I would strongly suggest that you stick with an online environment. Okay. And the benefit is that you have proof of receipt, you have a file number right away, you can see it, you can follow it up, and it's more responsive. All right. I don't really want to delve too deeply into it, but there's some new things in terms of what the government's working on. We don't have a lot of information about it, but they're using artificial intelligence or AI to make some decisions. And obviously, this is happening within the online sphere. Obviously, I'm not sure about where that's at with the paper applications per se, but we are seeing this as a little bit troubling. Now, the department has communicated that they're only using it as a initial screening tool. However, myself and colleagues and different people in the profession, we see a lot of really wacky decisions that are coming out that make no sense. And while it hasn't been confirmed, we're going to figure that those are made by maybe a computer. It's not, might have its algorithm out of whack. So if you get some sort of wacky decision there is room for asking for some reconsideration on that. But again, these visas and visitor visas are very discretionary in nature, and you need to understand that. So when you're submitting these applications, you need to make sure that you put together the strongest possible application that you can, and that it's all in there, because you can't just start, oh, I didn't know that, I'll just start adding this in or adding that in. You need to make sure it's all together, okay? Because once you file that application, if there was a refusal, it's a higher mountain to climb to be able to overcome it, unless you've been very strategic on what you've put into your application previously. Okay. So supporting documentation, I'm going to go through some of that stuff in subsequent slides, but these are very key documents and very key things that are going to have to accompany your application. And again, I'm going to talk about why I don't think the checklist is always your best source, but I'll speak about that in a sec. All right. Factors visa officers will consider. So, what's your intention? What's your intention to come to Canada? What are your plans? Do you have enough money to support these plans? Where is the source of income coming from? So if you're coming from a company, is the company paying for your trip? Are you paying for it? Et cetera, et cetera. Work history. What type of job are you in? Is it a stable job? Is it something that would be very painful for you to lose? As opposed to, oh yeah, I think I'm going to go on a vacation. I've just quit my job and I don't really have anything to come back to. That could be very problematic. So, these things all need to be taken into consideration. Travel history is also something that's looked at. So they want to see, have you traveled to different countries? What's your travel history like? Have you returned? Have you overstayed? Have you done different things like that? Ties to your country of residence or nationality. They want to see, do you have a reason to go back? Do you have opportunities back home? Or are you just kind of burning the bridge and coming to Canada and you're going to disappear into the system? And they're also looking at previous visa applications, both in Canada and other places as well. So they ask those questions. Have you ever been denied Canada or another country, I would strongly suggest that you're truthful with those, because a lot of the databases, immigration-wise, are linked up with certain countries. So stating that you haven't been denied and when in fact you have can be somewhat problematic. All right. Now, just as an aside to that, these are the things that, and obviously there's other things, and everything's very individual. But as I understand it, okay, I don't particularly agree with how they look at things, and I wish that within the system there was more time and more ability for them to look at people's individual circumstances a little bit harder. I don't blame the visa post or IRCC for that, because there's tons of applications that are going in, and from my understanding, at a very busy visa post, sometimes officers only have 8 to 10 minutes, and they have to clear these files out, and it's just mountains and mountains of files that they have to deal with. So you really have to make sure that you actually put your best foot forward, put all of the information in there to check all those boxes. But again, the biggest issue I have, so for instance, is travel history. I get where the factor is on that, but if you look at some people, they don't take trips until they're like, 14, 15, even later on in life, 20, whatever. Sometimes people just don't travel. And I think that, maybe it's a broad brush that's used sometimes for people, when in fact, people can get refused for very discretionary reasons. Okay, well, I'll talk about refusals as well and how you can treat those. Why the checklist is not always the best guide. Okay, so a checklist is asked for very minimal documents and information, and it is something that is used to lay out, here's what we need to be able to process your application at a very minimum. If you don't meet the minimum, you're going to get, it's going to get refused for not meeting, it's called an R10 check, where you haven't met all of what you needed to meet. So it's either the visa specific or the checklist that's in the country specific checklist, and also the checklist that accompanies the application. Okay. So you see the last point there, your responsibility to prove your case. When you're the one that's making the application, you have the duty to be able to give that person the ability to consider all of the information in front of them. If you're just going to follow what's on the checklist and not tailor it to your situation, no. Your responsibility is to show the officer that you actually meet all of these requirements, and it's incumbent upon you to give them the information that they require. All right. That's what's important. So every application is different. Every situation is different. You need to be aware of what the red flags are so that you're able to meet those. And you also want to meet them at a very minimal level, but you also want to give them enough information so that they can make a determination. I always think about it when I'm preparing an application for somebody. I always think ahead in terms of, somebody once had taught me this, that you got to prepare your application in case it fails, right? And I always think, I read a lot of case law and different decisions by, various judges. And one word always comes up. It's like, I see the word reasonable a lot. Like, what's the reasonableness of it? So that word, if you go and look up some case law and you control find and find the word reasonable, it comes up a lot. So what is reasonable for an application to be denied? I'll give you an example. I had a person that was denied because they said that they couldn't afford their trip, and for financial reasons, which was quite funny to me, because in actual fact, they had multi-million dollars in US bucks in accounts. Like, they were not looking for their next meal, but yet they were refused for financial considerations. So my client was a little bothered by that. I just kind of was like, oh, this is great, because now it's so ridiculous that you have to raise it up to somebody who can actually make a decision, because it was either made by a computer, which at the time I don't think it was. I think it was a frontline officer that made a really bad decision, but there is recourse for that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that in a second. All right. Hang in there, guys. We're plowing through. So, planning your visit and its importance. You need to talk about the length of the visit, what you're going to do. You're going to talk about your travel itinerary. A lot of times I'll ask for a single entry when I know I'm going to get a multiple entry anyways. It doesn't matter. But if it's only a one-off trip, you can ask for it. And when to apply for the visa. So I want to go back and I want to work these all into one thing. And I'm going to tell a story because many, many years back, I was sitting at a Canadian Chamber of Commerce event in the Philippines, and it was a social event. And where I was having a drink there, and one of the guys, we're just chit-chatting. I said, "What do you do?" He's like, "Oh, I work at the embassy." Fantastic. What do you do there? And he said, "Unfortunately, I'm the guy that says no." And I was like, "What do you mean by that?" He's like, I do a lot of the interviews. Now, back at this time, this was like, decades ago. Yeah, about 15 years ago. He says, I do interviews. And, the government used to do interviews a lot more than they do now. So he was telling me a story. He had this lady in, and she had a little travel agency up in Quezon City. And she was applying for a tourist visa because she wanted to expand her travel network. So, he was telling me the story. He's like, "Look, I asked him, I said, just to back up, I said, you must have some crazy stories." And he said, "Yeah." He's like, "I had this lady in today. She came in, she had a map of Canada. It was all rolled up in a thing. She looked like she was like, a general trying to take a beachhead in Europe or something. So she laid out this map and she had it all laid out. And she's like, "I'm going to fly into Vancouver and I'm going to go here." And she had it well planned. So she had her trip all planned out and she had it in a rolled up map and she laid it all out and she sat down. And the guy was like, I really, really he wanted to approve her. Everything made sense. She had a great plan, just didn't have enough money to get from one side of Canada to the other. And he asked her, he's like, how are you going to do this? She's like, "Well, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to stay there and I got to this." And she had it all worked out. And this is the sad part because checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. And again, the thing that I like about doing the interviews on the immigration side is it was more of a human touch, right? You can't really tell anything as much about what's on the paper. And part of my job is to make your situation real so that the person reading it can understand exactly what the ask is and make a decision based on that. But what he was doing, and it's kind of a great illustrative point, because she had everything sorted out, but he couldn't check the money box. He couldn't check it. And she didn't have all the verification that she needed to where she was staying, et cetera, et cetera. And, it's funny. He says to me, he's like, "Yeah, sometimes it kind of sucks because I have to say no to this." And he's like, "But I that's my job. That's what I have to do." So it's very unfortunate. But the point of the story is that all of the pieces need to fit together. So even though she had a great plan, she had this fantastic battle map of her travel across Canada and had it all plotted out, she couldn't show the money to be able to make that happen. All right. So when to apply for the visa? Again, very personal. You have to take this all into stride. One of the things that, some people will apply right at the last minute, and there could be processing issues. Generally you want to have a travel itinerary in place, but now what we're seeing with COVID, things have been thrown out of whack a little bit. So, again, it's really on a case by case basis. And the way that we're treating things is that you need to apply and explain and make sure that things make sense in relation to your application. Again, I say this all the time. Immigration and anything immigration related is a personalized process. Hence the reason for trust, expertise, and personalized service. Everything is personalized that we do, right? And for good reason. All right, putting it all together. Common mistakes to avoid. All right. First mistake, do not underestimate this application. All right. This is the most common mistake. Actually, you know what? I'm only going to give you one common mistake because this is the most common mistake that we see. Actually, there's a few. People underestimate this application and they think that, oh, it looks okay. I can do all that. Check, check, check. They follow the list, which I already told you not to do. And then they get refused and they wonder why. They're like, but I could have shown you this. And it's like, but it's not on the checklist. Well, it's the burden is on you to show that you actually meet the credential. Using a professional versus self-regulation, or self-representation, excuse me. Again, everyone's going to say, oh, he's just trying to promote his services or whatever it is. Yes, I am, because I am in business. However, there's a lot of things that, I understand about the process that somebody that doesn't work in this and would know. And this is the point. And this is where a lot of people, they really don't understand a lot of these things, is that it's not all on the website. It's not all laid out there. It's actually in the law. And then there's regulations, there's operational bulletins, there's procedural manuals. That stuff is not all just kind of right there for you. So you need to understand that. On top of that, this is a highly discretionary application. Okay. The other thing that we see is that people will use travel agencies. Okay. I am dealing with a few refusals right now from travel agencies. Now, technically, a travel agency is not supposed to be giving immigration advice, but they're in the process of selling tickets, for instance, and they might be like, oh yeah, we can do this. Whether money's exchanging hands or not, you're putting your future into somebody who's not, like, I don't go book tickets because I don't know how to book tickets, right? And this is the problem. A lot of people will go and they'll use a travel agency. Hey, they might get lucky, but you know what? Maybe they won't. And then they got a refusal. Now, the problem with a refusal is that once you are in the system, once you've made an application, you're given something called a UCI number, which is a unique client identifier. That number will follow you for 9 years past your last interaction with the immigration department. Okay. So if you've been refused once, you will always have to say on any immigration document that you've been refused, whether it be with Canada, the US, or wherever it is, you're gonna have to say that. And the other thing is too, is overcoming a refusal is not always the easiest thing to do. When we submit an application, we make sure that it's as strong as we can so that we can actually go in and ask for reconsideration if we can actually get that sorted, which we do have a pretty high success rate at doing on our prepared applications, because you can't introduce new information, but we stack our applications so that those things are in there and that they're dealt with, right? The next thing that you're going to need is you're going to need to know the exact reasons why you were refused. Now, you're going to get a form letter, and that form letter is going to, they're changing it because of recent decisions that the Supreme Court came out with, the Vavilov decision. But still, it's basically a cookie cutter check box. And that was the old ones. It used to be a bunch of boxes and they would check it off and you would see why you were refused. And it was like travel history, financial, whatever. And it was just, you didn't know exactly what the concerns are. Before you reapply, you need to understand what the exact reasons were, and you need to actually get the visa officer's notes. Now, unfortunately, if you're not Canadian or in Canada, you can't actually get those as a foreigner. So that actually leaves you at a disadvantage. Well, at the same time, applying if you've been refused, on an application, don't do anything else. Don't go and like, oh, I'll just kind of send this in. I see people sending in letters, dear sir, please reconsider. No, don't put more stuff into your file. What you want to do is you actually want to find out what the reason for the refusal is. And then you want to be able to say, well, listen, I'm going to address it like this. And then you're going to reapply, addressing that and making sure that everything is meeting that plus. And then if they come back again, then you're going to fight with it a little bit. Okay. If you can, but you have to make sure it's done properly. All right. So this is my last slide. It's always the same on every presentation. And I say the same thing all the time. Immigration is success in immigration is all about having a plan and being very strategic right from the beginning, knowing what the rules are, what the goals are, what your end goal is, and all of that other stuff. And then understanding how you can put that into application so that it's going to work for you. All right. That's the most important thing. All right. So you need to make sure that you're doing those things, and you need to make sure that your application is showing that stuff, and you need to have a plan. Now, I'm going to leave it at that because, again, I could keep going for a long time, as anybody who knows me. If anybody has any questions, I'll surely answer those for you right now. If not, you can certainly reach out to us. I'm going to put up some information for you there. So if you have any questions, so there you go. There's our contact details. And that's about it. So let's see if there's any questions here. Okay. Not seeing anything pop up. So I'm going to end it at that. So listen, thank you very much for listening to me, and hopefully this information was useful. I really, really hope that, you got some value out of it, and it makes you think a little bit about, how complicated this can actually be, and the importance of actually being able to plan ahead. Feel free to reach out to myself or my team. Obviously, you can find us at Facebook, just search Maple Immigration, or you can go to our website at mapleimmigration.ca. All right. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. We'll see you soon. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.